former newspaper editor Paul Cornu, and Rebecca Jane, deputy leader of UKIP. Paul, strikes. Good idea, bad idea?
Strikes are an essential, fundamental right of a democracy. Of course, I think the police and the military aren't allowed to strike, and that's quite right. But nurses, yes.
Why?
Because they are entitled to withdraw their labour. I mean, people are split on this. I mean, I know nurses, among my own friends, one of whom is strongly opposed to the idea of strike, and one is solidly behind the strike. But the idea of outlawing nurses striking, I find offensive. And I think that...
What about the patients? Do they find it offensive that they're being denied treatment they pay for with their taxes?
Well, the polls still suggest that public support is strong for the nurses. And I think at the moment, rather more sympathetic towards the nurses than towards the government, who seem at the moment hell-bent on trying to revive the Ted Heath, who runs the country, the unions or the government, which is in a time warp. It no longer applies in that sense, and I think it's more to do with a government desperate to hold the Tory party's divisions together and try to create a confrontation in the hope that it might change those 25 point deficit in the polls.
Yeah, or it's just a government who are trying to find a way of paying for the cost of lockdown crisis. Well, they bought them themselves. But I'm going to bring Rebecca in first, right? What are your thoughts?
We've gone too far. It's got to stop. Because, I don't understand the argument why it's OK for the police not to be allowed to strike, but then nurses are. I also think that they are asking... I understand that they need pay rises. We all need pay rises. Every single person in this country is struggling to a certain degree. People who are self-employed don't have the luxury of being able to strike. In fact, actually, when the self-employed people put their prices up for their clients then go elsewhere, and then they lose work. They have no choice but to carry on. We're all in a really difficult situation in the country right now. We all have to take a bit of a hit. And unfortunately, this has got to stop. We've gone way too far. There's far too many strikes, and I've had enough.
Well, So what? Can I ask a question? Yeah. So I worked before I was hoofed out show business, I worked on one particular TV show for 10 years. In those 10 years, not a single member of the crew got a pay rise. In the private sector, not one. So we're talking about the public sector are 1 in 5 of the employees in this country. Why should the public sector, in a time of absolute national financial crisis, have any right? And I'm not saying I agree. I'm just saying, why should they have any right to turn around and ask for a pay rise when everyone else is losing out?
Well, the figures that came out this week show, that pay increases in the private sector are far outstripping the public sector, which has been held back for several years. And it's interesting that the nurses, during the period in which their salary levels have dropped by 20%, politicians' salaries have increased by 28%, not to mention the quite generous perks and expenses that politicians
what do
receive.
You expect?
But also...
But the politicians are not being penalised. It's the public that are being penalised. In every which way that you look at all of these strikes, the public are suffering.
Well,
it's not the people that can actually do anything about it. They couldn't care less.
It's interesting that people keep citing Margaret Thatcher here, but as one or two of former members of her cabinet have pointed out, and some Tory MPs who are pressing the government now to give the nurses a better pay offer, one of the first things Margaret Thatcher did was to actually give quite a hefty hike to public sector pay when she first became Prime Minister.
Why does everybody else not deserve it?
People are getting it. You look at
No, they're not. No, they're not.
Look at the figures this week.
No, they're not. No, they're not. Actually, what happened today is that I had a hairdresser with me today, and she says that because of all of these strikes and how many clients have cancelled on her, she's probably going to have to give up her job now.
I'm sure that's true, and I feel sorry for her. But the figures that came out, the government's own figures that came out this week, showed that private sector pay is substantially outstripping public sector pay increases.
To be fair to the private sector provides the wealth in this country. It's not the public sector that provides the wealth. The private sector provides the wealth in this country. My question to you is, the nurses are asking for a 19% pay rise. At what point can Rishi Sunak go and sit down opposite them? So I think Rishi Sunak's a beep for not going and sitting down opposite and talking to them. But if you're coming to me and saying, I want a 20% pay rise, it's like, at what point can anyone have a reasonable negotiation here?
But of course, come on, Lawrence, you know how it works. The pitch is high, and then you negotiate. If the government
was prepared to negotiate... people's lives depend on it, and the pitch is not high.
But the government are not sitting down and prepared.
No, sorry, I'm not... No, sorry. I'm going to interrupt there. These are key workers. People are going to die as a result of this decision. You don't walk into it with a high pitch. You go into it and you go, this is what I can afford.
Tragically, people are dying and suffering because the NHS had its problems before COVID, since COVID, and the nurses, many of them are actually as concerned about the plight of their patients and the state of the NHS as they are about their right to claim for better pay.
Lost.
Not 90%. They're not actually.
Yeah, but I just find that sort of horse trading when it comes to people's lives utterly abhorrent. And
it's not horse trade on people's lives.
Anyway, that's Rebecca.
The problem is the NHS is run in an archaic system, and actually nobody's stopping and saying, let's change that. If we didn't spend so much money on ridiculous positions like Director of Lived Experience, are you joking, at £115,000 per year?
I've already applied.
I mean, I want it. But it's ridiculous.
But I think
the NHS has to face up to a few facts. They're archaic. Their management systems are absolutely atrocious. And I say that as somebody that's actually delivered NHS mental health contracts. They are atrocious. And nobody's actually stopping and going, let's overhaul this system. Let's stop paying the people at the top who are not doing half as much work as the people at the bottom and give it to them. Nobody's stopping to think about it.
I think we have some common ground there. In fact, without doubt, the NHS has too many middle management, too many sort of strange titles. But if we are talking about nurses and junior doctors, for example, they do need and deserve a substantial pay increase. Not 19%, but of course. But the real problem here is the government is spoiling for a fight because they think they're hoping almost this is going to redress the opinion poll and give them a better chance of surviving.
Do you really think that's true? Just to draw you out on that, every single part of the public sector is going on strike. You think the government are going, we're winning here? No. They're not. They're losing here. And I think there is some common ground to be found, but the common ground perhaps to be found is the fact that this is a result of the most dire failed public health experiment in history. And the public sector are having to deal with this one. And is that a fair enough thing to say? We've had our country in economy lockdown for 2.5 years.
Well, that's partly, of course, the politicians on all sides, including Keir Starmer, and I'm a sort of Labour supporter, but critical of Keir Starmer's fear of actually even addressing the B word, Brexit, which is...
we go.
I have an amnesty on this word. I wasn't involved in the political sphere when the B word came around, and I didn't care one way or the other, and now I really care. Right, last one.
How do you care?
Every man and his dog wants to blame Brexit. Brexit is like little child that
Harry blamed Brexit the other day.
Of course he did, yeah. And do you know what?
Meghan did too.
I'm in a rare position of being... I was a rare pundit to predict,
okay, guys,
even of a strong Remainer that
we have to wrap up. I want to
referendum.
thank you both very much for joining me.
Thank you.